Formula One returns to the Red Bull Ring in Austria this weekend for round 9 of the World Championship. It's another sprint race weekend as well for the teams. I'm Martyn Lee from the Autosport podcast, today joined by Matt Q and Alex Kalinauckas to look ahead to the Austrian Grand Prix. Gentlemen, welcome. Let's get some news out of the way before we get on to the race this weekend. Alpine secured new investment to the tune of 200 million euros, and the investors, well, they include Ryan Reynolds. So first 2.5 million for Wrexham Football Club, but now a Formula One investment which values Alpine at around 700 million. What has Alpine said about this, Alex, and what do you think it might mean for the team?
I think, first of all, it reflects the overall health of Formula One. You know, we've been talking about the Netflix Drive to Survive boom for a very long time now. And, you know, you don't get much bigger than Hollywood A-listers getting involved with a team. It's obviously good news for Alpine, I think, because everybody or often people might think back to the team's previous era as Renault. If you think back sort of the late 2000s, early 2010s, their financial crash and all the big manufacturers pulling out, various people bought into Renault and it really ended up going rather badly, you know, bills not being paid and things getting going really wrong around 2015. But in actual fact, Renault, well, because Renault obviously still owns the team, Alpine is just one of its brands, effectively recommitting its future to Formula One with what they're doing here. It's just that they want to cash in on what is a massive value. You know, we talk about teams like Williams and Aston Martin and their owners, Doralton Capital and Lawrence Stroll, having got like deals of the century in terms of buying the teams relatively cheaply, and then with the massive boom, as you say, 700 million, the valuation of Alpine, which actually almost, I think, you know, on the sort of lower end of what the top teams would be certainly either at or approaching £1 billion valuation, which is something Zach Brown, McLaren's chief, talked about a few years ago. So really good for Alpine, really good for Formula One. And again, another indication, I understand that Silverstone next weekend after Austria is going to have record attendance level. It's going to be 450,000. So very good news story for Formula One right now. Whether that'll be the case a few years down the line, if Max Verstappen and Red Bull win every race, we'll wait to see. But just for fans of Alpine, you know, they'll be expecting, will Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney, will they do a Wrexham? Will this turn into increased and better results in Formula One? Much harder to do because of how long things take to turn around. You can't just, well, you can just buy a load of superstars and hope they work together. But even if it does come to fruition, it will just take time.
Yeah, Alpine's certainly not as far down the grid as Wrexham. Sorry to kind of mix those two things up. It really was a rags to potential riches story there in football. And of course, there's other investors that have joined them in this Alpine investment. But if they're worth 700 million, it makes you wonder what a Ferrari, a Mercedes, a Red Bull is worth. You'd say a lot more. No disrespect to Alpine's current performance. Now, Matt, let me ask you about another piece of news that we heard this week. Hitech have announced they've formally lodged an application with the FIA to join the grid from 2026. What can you tell us about who Hitech are and the money behind them?
Yeah, well, Hitech should be sort of familiar to readers of Autosport because obviously they feature throughout the single-seater ladder, so F2, F3, F4, or maybe I should have said that F4, F3, F2, and then that leads you up to F1, which is their culmination and base at Silverstone. But they've just had a 25%, so literally one-upping Alpine by 1%, investment from a Kazakh billionaire, Vladimir Kim, who's sort of best known, if you like, for his work in mining. His company is one of the top 10 copper producers in the world. So that's where his fortune comes from. And with that investment, they have announced that they have formally lodged an application to the FIA to join the F1 grid for 2026. So that puts them in a camp with Michael Andretti's tie-up with Cadillac and the Formula Equal sort of setup helmed by ex-BAR boss Craig Pollock as having formally announced entries. There have been a few other sort of get-togethers that have made noise about joining interest, but noise about entering F1, but the three of us could do that and put out a glossy press release. It doesn't mean we've actually acted on it. So Hitech are at least a way down there, which is good. And I think it almost ties into the Alpine news, doesn't it? That, you know, and with Audi that coming in, is where will this sport be, or where will the championship be? Because you've had your Netflix boom, you've got the Brad Pitt film coming. Well, when you've got billionaires coming in and conservative with small c investment groups like Fenway Sports Group, who are associated with the Alpine deal and whatever, they're logical. They answer to, you know, private equity holders, they have to show educated forecasts so that people are willing to part with all this money. So the fact that they're doing that, rather than it being a state funded investment fund like the PAF or Mr. Stroll sort of vanity project, the fact that these guys are coming in calculated suggests that they see this boom is sustainable. So that's exciting. And so if Hitech come in, but then you've got the thing that's underlined this whole sort of saga with Michael Andretti sniffing around is that Formula One want one thing and the FIA want the other, in terms of expanding grids, and F1 and teams say there's no room at the inn. That's why they want to make a $600 million anti-dilution fund. Well, Alpine, now you've got the valuation, you see where that holds. So you're talking $1.5 billion to buy a team, get in, and that's if you want to relocate it to the US in the Andretti case. So there's sort of demand, but if the FIA want it, so you've got this sort of standoff, which will be interesting to see how it plays out, because I think at the moment it certainly seems in some camps if the FIA says something's blue, F1 says it's red. So seeing how they come to any kind of amicable agreement over this will be a good thread to follow.
Yeah, going back to that Wrexham investment, and one of the things that excited, I think, so many people about that story is their entry into the Football League. But of course, Formula One, much like the American franchise system, you can't just have a team graduating from Formula 2 to Formula 1. That's not the way Formula 1 set up. So we look to see 2026 and new teams entering, and the existing teams saying, oh, hang on a minute, we're not so happy about diluting some of the money that's flying around. But let's talk about a fantastic Grand Prix last year, at least the Grand Prix on Sunday. Alex, you're about to get on a plane and head to Austria. Last year, Ferrari had a big advantage over Red Bull. Leclerc passing Verstappen multiple times on track, winning, not from pole. That was a big deal for Leclerc. All those Max fans and their orange flares will be back, I'm sure, this weekend in force. But last year, Ferrari reliability, those famous shots of Sainz's car on fire at the top of the hill. Couldn't get out because he couldn't let the foot off the brake, and yet no marshals to run to his aid. Just after, though, setting a fastest lap, Ferrari had real pace this time last year. Alex, in terms of performance, 12 months on, what's different? Well,
also, don't forget, with Ferrari and reliability, Leclerc had that throttle problem towards the end, and that made it certainly very exciting whether he would make the finish. But what's changed in 12 months is simply that Red Bull is the dominant team, the dominant car, and Ferrari has slipped behind Aston Martin and potentially Mercedes as well. What it will look for, though, is the historic data that was gathered last year in terms of what ultimately led to Red Bull's defeat, was the fact that it got things wrong on tyres. It does have a sort of occasional propensity to do this. It shows you, that it's sort of like the American football any given Sunday kind of thing. Look, these are still very, very good teams, even the ones that aren't getting the results. They're still absolutely on it as much as they can be. They're just constrained by the resource restriction, the resource inequality problem we know Formula One has, right? So if Red Bull isn't on it, it will things will be closer, and as we saw last year and occasionally in 2021, they're not on it, they're punished by other teams. The difference, as I said, is they're just way further out in front this year. So you would logically expect Max Verstappen, on top of qualifying last year, on the sprint race last year, you would expect that to play out again. What's more interesting is actually sticking with Ferrari. It looked actually quite strong in Canada if you just take it in isolation. Its race pace was strong, was on the one stopper, very, very fast, looked strong in FP2, and ultimately that was a weekend of it's a missed opportunity, total missed opportunity for Ferrari because of what went wrong in qualifying. So its aim will be to get as close as it can to Red Bull. I have no expectations, why would you on the face of it beating Red Bull, and the dynamic will be, can Sergio Perez get anywhere near Max Verstappen? I doubt it, because of what we saw last year, because of what we've been saying. It was these kind of high speed tracks that is where he will had a difference to Max Verstappen, and that has borne out again this year. So yeah, it will be for Ferrari. Can it make good on its Canada sort of promising showing, getting amongst Aston Martin and Mercedes? And you never know if Red Bull do slip up, if there is a bit of inclement, unpredictable weather, whether that makes a difference. But yeah, encouraging historical form for Ferrari. Red Bull aiming to hit back at its home track.
You doing a track run this weekend? It's a bit hilly.
That'll be the plan. Yeah, I've been to the Red Bull Ring once back in 2017 when I covered Formula 2, and it is honestly the single most beautiful setting and therefore track that I've ever seen. It is truly stunning. So didn't get to run it then, so I will be definitely doing that this year.
Matt, any thoughts on the battle at the front?
Not on the track run. Not on the battle at the front. I think it would be interesting to see if the sprint race plays as defining a feature as it did last year, because Red Bull were all over Ferrari in the sprint race, so they went away, adjusted a few settings on the car and came back, learnt how to manage the tyres, and that's how they responded so emphatically. But with the current Red Bull monopoly, you don't expect such a massive swing. Where it is uber competitive, Mercedes, Ferrari, Aston Martin, maybe chuck Alpine in there as well. And you've got McLaren bringing some significant upgrades. Whether you do have such as a fluctuation in competitiveness overnight, because that was a real aspect of Austria last year, is that you had two completely different narratives. Like, if it's, allow me a silly tangent, but it's like, it's covering British touring cars, where at the end of the weekend you've got to write a report based on 3 different winners and you're not sure quite how to pick out the thread, and that was an added element of last year. So to see whether it can sort of influence the whole weekend, which is what you want. I know it's about changing the format so that you can have different winners, add a bit of a new narrative, but it's also good when it all feeds into each other and sort of helps and influence teams. And when you only have one practice session to validate setup, upgrades, or whatever, then what you learn from the sprint race has a it's really significant in terms of informing, for a horrible word, to the rest of the weekend. So I like to see it all sort of pay into one another like that.
A quick word, Alex, if you would, on McLaren. They said they're bringing a triple pack of Aero upgrades to change, in their words, every single aerodynamic part. They'll be arriving over Austria, Britain and the Hungarian Grand Prix. How badly do McLaren need these upgrades, Alex?
It's really keen to have them. I think if you listen to Lando Norris, Matt and I were in Spain, the race before Canada, and just listening to him in their Meet the Team media briefing, press session after qualifying. He qualified third. And he was just like, well, I expect to get lapped 3 times in the race. That just sort of demonstrates the scale of the difficulty. Obviously, that it didn't play out as that, because he was obviously being a bit facetious. He did have a terrible start there, and then obviously he lost some points in Canada because of that contentious, unsportsmanlike behaviour penalty. The actual penalty actually was fair enough, but it was just the way it was described by the FIA. But yeah, this McLaren update, if it's as comprehensive as they're sort of openly stating, it basically effectively means they are the latest sort of team to introduce what we could consider a B-spec car for the season. It's not quite B-spec in the sense of, what teams used to do back in the day of changing literally everything, because obviously the floors and the underbody surfaces that they take so long to nail, to understand, get right, and then produce. But the upper aero surfaces, as we saw with Mercedes changing in Monaco, the surprise of Ferrari, which had sort of effectively said it wasn't going to do that, doing that in Spain. Now McLaren's coming, and the reason why Norris has been sort of a bit downbeat, a bit sort of what's the point, but sort of a bit meh about things, is because of McLaren losing its way on development targets last winter. So where it started the season in Bahrain and having its difficulties there, it then reached the point it wanted to be at the start of the season in Baku with its floor update. So this big upgrade package is effectively, the next step in that, and the real point in time McLaren has been targeting. And the question, how badly does it need this? Well, very badly. It's currently 27 points behind Alpine, and you consider how many points Alpine lost in that Australian Grand Prix disaster at the final restart that McLaren was one of the big beneficiaries of. It's vital. It's absolutely vital if McLaren's going to have any hope of catching Alpine, possibly even overhauling it before the end of the season.
Well, it's a sprint weekend, as Matt says. We've covered a third of the season now, and we're seeing some fluctuations in performance all the way down the grid. Let's get some final thoughts from both of you guys on what you're going to be looking out for this weekend. Mercedes' pace was nowhere last year at times, and yet it was another one where Hamilton was on the podium this time last year in Austria. It's a third and fourth, actually, even after one of the worst penalties I saw all year, which was Russell punting off Perez. But Russell, look, I will still fight you on this. Russell was ahead going into the corner, left him room on the outside. Perez just braked later and steered into him and then complained, and Russell was penalised. I didn't agree with that one. And another famous turn 4 incident. Of course, eventually Red Bull retired Perez from the race last year. Mercedes weren't strong at times. They were losing out to the Haas cars this time last year. We probably won't see that same battle this year. But Matt, some final thoughts on you about other performance that you'll be looking for down the grid.
Yeah, the Mercedes is a good place to start. Last year they had that disaster in qualifying where both drivers sort of binned it in the gravel. Really rare mistakes, and if you remember, that came at a time where you had the sort of the positive result in Spain, and they thought they were sort of slowly unlocking everything that made the W13 tick, and then it was just this super unpredictable, difficult car to drive, and sort of really hit home how bad the problems were. And Mercedes have gone to Canada and sort of backed up their performance to show that, you know, you can't just go 2023 and 2022 strong performances in Spain were isolated upgrades, but you know, we need to see more. We're, you know, as you say, we're a third of the way through the season. Well, we want this season to be good, and we want to see glimmers that 2024 will be an ultra competitive fight. So seeing what Mercedes can do, and also I think Aston Martin, a good one. They think they're going to suffer from the revised format. They're still understanding their Canada upgrade, so they have a bit more to unlock. But you know, compared to the other tracks in the season, this shouldn't really, it's not necessarily a great place for Aston, because you've not got proper sort of fiddly low speed sections where Alonso in particular has excelled. So again, it's all about that P2 battle in terms of the teams. You know, as Alex said earlier, after such a competitive showing from Ferrari, but them having started out of sequence anyway, so not actually knowing how far they came along when Helmut Marko, you know, can easily say, oh, they definitely would have won if they'd have been with us. Well, they weren't. So, you know, whatever. Insert Max Verstappen complaining about another downshift problem to pretend he had something to worry about in the race, that sort of thing. So again, I think it's that battle. Will be all eyes on that. And then, as Alex said, Austria is one of the most beautiful racetracks. Part of that comes from the mountains, and then you can watch sort of grey clouds form over the top of them, and then dump a load of water on track. So that'd be good as well.
Yeah, now last year we did see in those Astons, it was just kind of the end of Vettel's era, pootling around at the back. I hate seeing great world champions leave like that. Of course, he was punted off last year by Gasly, wasn't it? And that was a genuine penalty, because Gasly missed the apex by a country mile. Vettel was furious. But it was just one of those kind of races that you think, oh man, I hate to see world champions kind of just petering out at the end of their career. But Aston Martin now have a renewed vigour in their man, Fernando Alonso. Will we see him back on the podium? Final thoughts and final word with you, Alex.
I mean, yeah, if he carries on his form, no reason why not. It's the question is, can Ferrari continue on its Canada form? Can Mercedes get in the fight, because they're looking a lot stronger? We know that, you know, Alonso has adapted very well to the Aston Martin, I wouldn't see why not. You know, he seems to be very invigorated with the current situation, and hopefully doesn't get taken out in a sprint race and have to start at the back.
That is our preview for today. We'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Agree? Disagree? Leave your thoughts. We love to see them, and make sure that you are subscribed to the channel, because we'll be back with all of the updates over the weekend, and I'll see you on the review podcast on Sunday night on the Autosport podcast. If you like the video, give us a thumbs up. It lets us know that you like it, and we'll make more just like this one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.